right? We do something, and that something has to be connecting with people. And guess what? All of these people, especially in Appalachia, are broken. And a lot of the brokenness leads to addictions as well.
Welcome to Intrinsically Motivated, where we have conversations with experts in the field of addiction, recovery, and those personally affected by it, as we seek to mobilize the church to replace addiction and mental health challenges with flourishing. On today's episode, we'll be talking with Pastor Jerry Williams of Redstone, Elizabethton. We'll discuss his experiences in church planting and how deep personal relationships can be the driving force to make the gospel known. I'm Tucker Clements, audio engineer and editor for Uplift Appalachia, and this is Intrinsically Motivated.
I was thinking about this when I was getting set up, when we were kind of coming over here and getting ready. I was like, where are we going to start with this? And I was like, what's my first memory of meeting Jerry? and I remember specifically, I was either in 4th or 5th grade,
Right.
and I was getting my my perfect attendance certificate at Providence Academy, and my dad was working there at the same time.
Teaching logic.
Right? And it was like you handed me my perfect attendance card, and then you shook my hand and said, you can go shake your dad's hand if you want to. And for whatever reason, I still remember that at that period of time. How long were you at Providence?
Yeah, 23 years.
23 years? So when you started there, what year did you start there? Was
96.
96. Okay. So that was my second year there. So that would have made sense that so I'd been
there in the early years then.
I'd been there I was 4th, 5th, 6th grade. So I was there 95, 6 and 7.
Okay.
Before then we ended up homeschooling, that sort of thing. Was that what your background was in? Like you thought you wanted to go into school administration and be there for a long time, or how'd you find yourself there to begin with?
Yeah. So the Cliff Notes version would be, I thought that the Lord was calling me to pastor when I was in my early 20s. And sought counsel, went to Bible college. I thought you need to learn the Word of God and all that kind of stuff. And then I ended up through a series of events finding out about this opening at this new Christian school. And I was like, I don't know why, but I think that the Lord wants me to apply for this thing. And I was the least qualified candidate. I really was.
Right.
But they hired me, and I was like, so I thought the Lord was calling me to pastor, but all along he was calling me to lead a Christian school because
It's still shepherding. It was still shepherding, but it's a different kind of shepherding. But it's still kind of it's a related skill set. Maybe not exactly 1-to-1, but.
So when later, this is hitting fast forward.
Yeah.
When the Lord said, your time is up there. And then later I found out that he was calling me to pastor in Elizabethton. I remember this conversation I had with his dad at Providence. And we were doing like a Bible study together, and he wanted to hear my story. So I gave him the whole story, and I said, so you see, all along the Lord was calling me to be in a Christian school. And he was like, okay, did you ever think that one of these days that the Lord might call you from that into something else? I said, no, probably not. I think I'm going to retire probably doing this. And he just laughed. He's like, okay, well, we'll see about that. And I look back on that now and I'm like, Oh, he was so right. Because the truth of the matter is, I think that I did hear the call of God in my 20s, but I'm just a really slow learner. So it took 23 years of learning how to manage, other people and finding out about my own sinfulness and brokenness and what have you.
Yeah.
Before I was even at a place where I could properly shepherd.
Right.
So, yeah.
So did you grew up in this area, right?
Yeah,
were
been
you
here my
in
whole life.
Were you Elizabethton, Carter County?
I was Happy Valley Warriors. So
okay.
Yes, I'm in the middle, kind of the
so
Milligan
you're like
area.
Right there. Okay. So when in that period did you know? I know you already kind of said Cliff's Notes version.
Yeah.
But when was it you knew I'm going into some sort of shepherding type ministry or some sort of Bible based ministry? Was that early on?
That was just early 20s.
Yeah.
You have like fence posts in your life,
right?
In your spiritual life. I had a fence post moment when I was a sophomore in college. And it was 3:00 in the morning, like looking at myself in the mirror. I was running around with a bunch of guys doing things I shouldn't have been doing. And I can't explain it, but I was like, oh my goodness, I am standing before a holy God and I am an absolute mess. And I just broke. I literally called my pastor that barely knew me at 3:30 in the morning. He met me at the church at 4 a.m., and there was just something that happened there. And at the time, I wasn't sure, am I getting saved now because I wasn't saved before?
Right.
And I just think that the Lord, had his hand on me at that moment. So after
one of those really
that,
sanctifying moments where it's
it
like,
was.
It may not be it may not be this moment of salvation thing, but it's one of those kind of, I like that you said kind of like a tentpole, like just like one of these stakes in the ground. There's like these timeline moments that you kind of look back to, and you're like,
yeah. And in that moment, then I began to have like this hunger for the Word of God, and it never went away. And I remember I struggled. I was, physically sick, and they didn't know what was wrong with me. And I thought I was dying or something. And I remember like laying on the gym floor, the closet floor at University High. And it was in between classes. I was doing my student teaching, and I had a new child, and I cried out to God, and I was like, okay, I am desperate to know that I'm struggling and that you are there. And I read my Bible every day, but I need to know you. So tonight I'm going to go home. And this was like a real conversation. I was like, I'm going to open up the Word of God, and I'm going to read it, but you've got to reveal yourself to me in a personal way, because I'm dying here. And I went home. And I prayed, and I opened up the Bible, and he just illuminated the words in a way that I had not experienced before.
right.
And then after that, I just couldn't put it down. So there was like a combination of a couple of fence posts there,
Yeah.
that I think that the Lord used that was a part of him calling me into ministry. But I didn't
Right.
see that
And,
at the time.
and like you said, it might have been 23 years of school
Right.
administration
Yeah.
while it was refining you and getting you ready for. Do you think if you'd gone immediately into some sort of pastoral ministry that it would have looked very different than if, or maybe I should say it this way. How do you think it would have looked differently had you gone immediately into pastoral
My
ministry?
Gosh, I would have been the worst pastor ever. Just from the standpoint of, like, when you're young, you think you can do anything. There's a lot of pride there. There was no brokenness. There was a lot of a judgmental kind of an attitude toward people and sin decisions and lifestyles and what have you, because I grew up in a pretty legalistic environment. I heard lots of sermons against homosexuality. I heard lots of sermons against drinking alcohol. I heard lots of sermons against like certain sins.
Right.
And there was never kind of an endorsement to like, hey, go sit with sinners.
But what does it look like if we also go love them?
I had
and
no idea
show
what that
them
was like.
Yeah.
I had never experienced that. It was literally like years into like leading the school before the Lord kind of opened up, illuminated my heart and my mind to be like, oh, you only know Christians.
Right.
You have got to find a way to go, get to know, rub shoulders with people that are not like you. And that changed my life.
Well, because I know that's it's so easy to get busy. Like we were talking about this before we started recording. It's so easy to get busy within kind of the confines
Sure.
of your role, your job, or whatever it is.
Yeah,
and
you're doing your
and
thing.
when you're working at a Christian school with Christian families, it's so easy to kind of silo yourself, not even intentionally, but just like you said, to kind of realize after a while, wow, I am only seeing this very small snapshot. And I mean, I was at that school for 3 years, and I know a lot of people that are still there, and it's an amazing place. But at the same time, it really is easy to lose sight of what's going on outside as well.
Yes.
And you don't realize you're doing it because
Right.
your life is full with good things, but maybe missing some of those other opportunities and things that are out there. Yeah. So were you at Redstone Johnson City while you were still working there before you got called to serve in Elizabethton?
Yeah. So Redstone opened up in October. I can't remember the year, like 11 years ago or whatever. And we just showed up literally the kind of the pre-service. They didn't even advertise yet. They were kind of like trying to work through the kinks. But I had heard from a good friend of mine. He was like, man, if I was going to step into a church, I think I would try the new Redstone church. I'm like, tell me more, because we've been praying and we've been looking.
Right.
And he was like, just gospel center. I'm like, I don't even know what you mean by that, but I want to go check it out.
Those words sound good to
Yeah,
me.
they sound good to me. So we just showed up that morning, and then later the Lord called me to be an elder there, and then I became like a part-time community life pastor. So I was doing like men's ministry and community groups.
Right. Okay. Very cool. And at what point in the timeline did y'all start? That was at the time. It was Acts 29, correct?
Yes, it still is.
It still is Acts 29, and it was so the whole mentality behind Acts 29 is you're going to plant a church,
Right.
We're going to plant more churches,
Yes.
and so when did you realize that hey, we're going to plant more churches? We're going to involve you specifically.
Yeah, so Spencer Till and I were the only elders at the time, and we were away on an elder retreat. We were praying, we were thinking, we were planning, and then in one moment, I remember like getting all of our people up on this big board, and we started writing down like where everyone was from. And we had this list. It was like Elizabethton, Hampton area, Carter County area. And we were like, oh my gosh, look at this. We've got 32 people that are coming from Elizabethton or Hampton to Johnson City. And it was like, I wonder if the Lord might be doing that for a reason. I wonder if he might want us to plant a church in Elizabethton. So what we did, this is highly scientific and very spiritual. We put it in our phone reminder every day, like at a certain time. It would just pop up in our phones, pray, church plant in Elizabethton. It was just a question mark. So we began praying. And like a year and a half later, that turned into, taking steps to actually make that happen. So,
Right.
Yeah.
And then did you, once those steps started happening, were you like, this is going to be me?
Well, no, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. So I was still running the school.
Right.
I was doing my thing, and I had taken a sabbatical, never had a break at all. Something was off. I realized, and this is another like very non-scientific thing, but I tell people like, pay attention to what you think about early in the mornings before you get going. And pay attention to what you think about in the evenings after everything else is done. Where's your heart? What are you thinking about? And I realized that I was no longer like dreaming and planning and thinking about the school. I was thinking about guys that were struggling in their marriages. I was thinking about guys that were struggling with pornography. I was thinking about guys that are just not walking with the Lord. So every chance I could, I would like go have lunch with them or go have coffee with them. I only was doing the school things because I was supposed to, because it was my job. But something was off.
Right.
And I told the board, hey, I need a break. Something's going on here. I'm not sure what it is. And I went away for a couple of weeks, and I was fasting and, praying and what have you. And that was the moment that I realized that the Lord was calling me away from the school. I just didn't know when. So I come back to the school, and I'm like thinking, oh, it's going to happen any moment. And it just didn't. So at some point, I'm like, okay, I'm here now. I need to do the best job that I can. So I just jumped in with both hands and both feet, and I was working as hard as I could. And on a random Christmas break night, the Lord kept me up all night long. And
those 3 a.m.
it was one of those. And
Yeah.
I literally, the guy that's running the school now, I texted him at 4 o'clock in the morning and said, hey, let's get together. I want to talk with you. And, and I let him know that the Lord was calling me away. I asked him if he would be interested. And I can't hire you, but I can connect you to the board members. And he was shocked. He was like, what do you mean you're leaving? You are Providence Academy. I'm like, no, I'm not. And that's the problem. That's where my identity has been all of these years.
Right.
But the Lord is clearly showing me that there's more to me than just being a school administrator.
Right.
But I think he's calling me away.
Yeah, that's very similar to the way that because we had our church plant here in Johnson City for 8.5 years. And right before we closed, I was probably the last of the elders and the leadership to really feel like, no, it is time to close and kind of spread ourselves out throughout the churches in the area. And I had that same kind of night where it's like, I cannot sleep.
Yeah.
And because it was like, I was stubborn. It's like, I knew that God was saying, no, it's time. And it was like this whole night of just like admitting to myself that I know that it really is time to do something else and to invest in different areas, and that he was calling me away. But it's sometimes just, it's like, this is what I know. This is what I've always thought we were supposed to be doing. How could it be something different now? And it's like he slowly starts changing you.
Right.
And then there's that one moment where you're like, I'm going to fight really hard one more time. And that was it. It had to happen now.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was my moment. And then I had to go to the board the next week. And they were like, well, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I don't know. I feel like Abraham. The Lord's calling me to something, but I didn't know where. But I had
I'll
to
tell you
walk
when
in
you get
faith.
there.
Yeah. So I began doing that, and we transitioned, and they were like, letting everybody know Jerry's leaving, and new guys coming in. They had hired him and what have you. And it was that summer, after I had already resigned, I found out that I had prostate cancer, and it was bad. We didn't know that at the time.
Right.
It was like, yeah, something's off. Let's do a biopsy. Probably a 10% chance that you have cancer. I wouldn't worry about it too much. I'll call you next Thursday. And I look at the doc and I know him. I'm like, are you going to call me? He's like, no, my nurse practitioner will call you. He said, now, if I call you, then, ha, ha, ha.
Then it was 10%.
You're going to know. And sure enough, he called me. And I was like, are you serious? He said, Jerry, you've got cancer. So the way that transitions into your like original question was like, I had to have like a radical prostatectomy. It was a big deal. And at my age, that was pretty early to be having that kind of a major surgery.
Right.
But we did it, and I came out of surgery, and I was at home, and I was by myself, and we're talking like, still in pain. I still had catheter, just picture the whole thing. I've got the Word of God open up, and I'm reading through it, and I'm praying, and it was one of those moments where I'm like, oh my goodness, this church plant that I have been a part of, and we've been looking for someone to lead it, we all of the pieces are coming together. We've got a team, we've got a location, we've got everything, but we didn't have a leader. I think that the Lord's calling me to that position, and that was when I knew.
Yeah. So when you finally realized that, and you took that back to the elders at Redstone, Johnson City, and all of that, were they surprised, or were they like, we've just been waiting for you to figure this out for a little while, or was there?
It was mixed. So I was Spencer's right hand man, so he was like, "Oh no, what am I going to do?" Right. So there was a little bit of that, but like one of the other guys that was one of the leaders there, he was like, "Yeah, Jerry, I've seen this for 3 years. I've been trying to tell you this, but you wouldn't listen to me." So there was a little bit of both.
The timing wasn't right for you
the
to hear it yet.
Right.
Yeah. So now, how long have you guys been down in Elizabethton? So you've been there
5.5 years.
5.5 years. Wow. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. And what have you learned in the first those first 5.5 years? What are some of the things that you guys have been learning collectively, or maybe you've been learning individually, shepherding that group of people?
Oh gosh, it's a lot. There's a lot I could spit out here. A couple of things. One, I would say, like in the Deep South, when we talk about Appalachia, and you all know this because of the ministry that you're involved in as well, but people are hard. People are they're hard. They'll talk about anything. They'll talk about politics. They'll talk about sports. They'll talk about the Cyclones or the Toppers. They'll talk football all day long with you. But when it comes to like exposing their hearts, talking about struggle, talking about sin, they just don't do that well.
Yeah.
So we saw that early on. So we kind of changed the vernacular a little bit, where we said, "Hey, quit talking about like planting churches. Okay, let's plant the gospel." And people would be like, "Well, what do you mean by that?" And I was like, "Well, people need to hear the gospel. They need to understand who the Lord is." Right. And that's only going to happen if we go one person at a time. So look at people that are in your sphere of influence, or someone that you just have taken note of, that you see them on a regular basis, and you kind of can't get them out of your mind. Begin praying for them, and then actively step into conversations with them and see if the Lord doesn't open up a door. And when he does, give them the truth, give them the gospel, tell them what the Lord has done in your life. If we all do that, this is like the Redstone Elizabethton core team. If we all start doing that, the plant will take care of itself. Right. But if we come in focused on the building and our initiatives and marketing and branding, that it's about us. So let's not plant a church. Let's plant the gospel one person at a time.
Let's be the church.
And we did.
Yeah.
So those conversations and the hardness of heart, if you get to know people, and here's like little things, like saying like, "Hey, I've got 2 hours. I just want to hear your story."
Yeah.
You got a mom? Where were you, raised? And when did y'all get married? And whoa, what was that all about? And you take the time to listen to someone's story, that means a lot, because no one ever does that, for one. But also you start to hear things that come out, and then you see the moment that the Lord opens up the door, and you'll know it.
Yeah.
And you step into it. And if he doesn't do that, then don't force your way. Just continue to love on them and have a relationship with them. So that's what began to happen. And then we would come back as a team, and we would like share, the way that the Lord was opening up the doors. I think in that first year we had like 13 converts, that were baptized. And it was those kinds of conversations that led to that.
Just being together
church,
and talking about the gospel. And that's amazing. Yeah. I know you've been there 5.5 years. So my parents would have joined you guys about 4 years ago now at this point, because that was about when we were closing here at
post COVID.
Just after, just as COVID was kind of ending.
Yeah.
Things were still a little bit weird at some of the places that different people ended up, that sort of thing. But I know we were still all in and trying to figure out how to, mobilize and equip the church to address addiction and these sorts of things. And I know my mom. I know she's not going to not be talking about that everywhere she goes, because that's who she is. And so I know as soon as they started getting there, I'm sure they were like, "We're really happy to be here. Hey, have you heard about our ministry that we're trying to do with Uplift Appalachia?" And I'm sure that conversation happened, maybe even before they ever showed up on a Sunday. But I mean, I know them, and I know they would probably start having that conversation pretty quick. And I know Redstone Elizabethton was one of the first churches to really say, there's something to this. We want to learn more. We want to do more. We want to get involved. I know we did a training here. We've done a couple of different interactions back and forth. I know you guys have kind of started trying to get involved in addiction recovery ministry with us for several years now. And I just want to kind of hear what your experience has been like, kind of getting into that, maybe what might be motivated you to want to learn more at the beginning, but also kind of what that process has looked like, and kind of how that's maybe shaped parts of the life of your church.
Yeah. So I remember the Sunday that they showed up, and afterward I was, talking to people, and I walked up to him, and, Andy was like, Jerry, I don't know if you'll remember me or not. I'm like, hello, Andy, how are you? And Dale, how are you? Of course I remember you.
Right.
So we started the conversation. We got to know each other a little bit, but pretty early on, as we began like sharing stories, they were like, tell us how Redstone started, and, what have you guys been doing and what have you. We realized, or I realized, oh, we're doing the same thing. Dale would talk about, going and just loving on homeless people, and drug addicts and what have you. And I was like, yeah, I do this thing on Wednesdays where I go into like literally a local bar, and I just go sit down with people that I don't know and get to know them. And I've established these relationships. In fact, you ought to come with me, so I invited them to come. And it was fun. Like the first, day, Dale was like, okay, so what do you do? Just go up. I said, just sit and listen and just watch what the Lord does, and then we'll talk about it afterward. And it was just this random group of people that over time had gotten to know one another. But there were homosexuals. There were people that were, would call themselves atheists, and we're all sitting at a table having conversations. They know I'm a pastor. There's some other believers that are there, and a bunch of non-Christians, but we would just have these conversations, and every once in a while something would come up that would turn into a really fruitful conversation. And then afterward, Dale was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. This is the same kind of a thing that we've been doing with Uplift Appalachia. So I realized that we really were doing similar things in that we're trying to rub shoulders relationally with broken people. And we are broken people as well. We may not have made the same choices that they have made. We may not be stuck, in the way that some of them are. But our hearts are fickle. We run after other things, and sometimes that can lead to addictions. Sometimes it doesn't, but those people are no different than us. So why would we treat them any differently? Why don't we get to know them and love on them? And it was just this natural fit. So over time, then Andy and Dale begin to educate me.
To look like. Yeah. Well, that's the thing is if churches are being churches the way they're supposed to be, that's kind of saying it in a broad way. But if churches are being the church correctly, honestly, it should look pretty similar no matter who it is that we're ministering to. Yeah. But sometimes it just takes a little bit of extra understanding about what does addiction really look like, and what is trauma and past adversity, and how do those things affect us. And so I know when we started working with Redstone, it was mostly, it wasn't like we were trying to say, here's ministry that you ought to be doing. It's more like, as you're doing ministry already, and the people that you're already getting to know, here's some extra tools and things that you can kind of add into your conversation, just things that you should know, because that's going to help you to respond more effectively, or maybe know how to meet a specific need or answer a specific question that may come up that maybe you wouldn't be comfortable, engaging with. Because it's like you said, a lot of times it's just being comfortable, being ready to go where the conversation goes. Yeah. And if you're ministering to somebody who's struggled with addiction, homelessness, whatever it is, those may be worlds that you've never really walked in. And so just learning new language and new facts and things just gives us a little bit more confidence. But I mean, we have the gospel too, and that should be our biggest confidence behind what we're doing. And that's why we try to tell churches, we're not trying to remake everything that you do. We're just trying to help you feel a little bit more equipped to specifically, target some ministry and these kinds of things that are happening anyways.
Yeah, and I know that the church has not done a very good job of engaging the culture and engaging unbelievers. Yet you look at Jesus and you just see it over and over and over. People are like, what does he think he's doing? Does he not know what kind of a sinner she is? Or why in the world is he having supper with, these people, tax collectors, and these sinners? And I try to imagine how much fun those dinners must have been. And so, but when you do that, when you'll go sit down with people that aren't like you and you get to know them, you realize, oh, you are actually a lot like me.
I mean, all of my favorite stories, my favorite moments from when we were here at this church are going to be with people that I would have never interacted with before I was doing ministry downtown here. Yeah. That sort of, it's like, those are the things that really stick out to me as important and like life altering for me too. Like not just for them, but life altering for me. Like I'm having my eyes open to, this is what ministry really looks like. And this is what gospel conversations really look like. And it's the best. And it really is a cool thing. Cause then it's like, as you start to see these kind of little moments where there's, those light bulb moments where somebody starts to understand something in a way, or they have that, kind of moment in their life where now something starts to improve, or they realize, wait a second, I've been being changed slowly. It's like, that is one of those most rewarding feelings that you can possibly have. And it's just really cool. But you're right. It's like the church. And I think that kind of goes back to, some of what you were saying about, folks that live in Appalachia,
right?
And that translates into even the church side of it too. Like we are really confident in who we are. We're really proud about the things that we know and the ways that we were raised. And, it's hard to convince people or encourage people to kind of open up and be vulnerable. And I think that's been one of the things that's, as I've talked to different pastors in different churches, one of the things that they'll often say is what's one of the biggest consistent struggles that you see in churches that you talk to. And if you've been through any of our trauma-informed care training, trauma-informed church training, one of those key principles is trustworthiness and transparency.
Right.
And it's that transparency, that vulnerability part that churches often struggle with, because I feel like we sometimes think we have to present the best version of ourselves because we're representing Jesus. And the more I've looked at it, the more I realize showing all the vulnerability just makes Jesus look that much better. Absolutely. Because it's what he's doing despite us and despite what we would naturally want to be doing. That can be the most important part. And so I love hearing you say that part.
Yeah, you used the word transparency. I would say that would be one of our aspirational values. You'd have to ask the church whether or not we're actually doing that or not. But that's something that we aspire to. I use this phrase a lot when it comes to like helping the elders and making decisions. I say, let's lead out loud. And leading out loud means you don't have to know all of the answers. You don't have to like have a great strategic plan that's presented with bullet point 1 and 2. But you can say, here's an idea. Here's my struggle in making this decision. Here's my brokenness. Here's my own sin issues and what have you. But you do those things in front of the church body, and really walls do come down. They're like, oh, our leadership is being honest and real with us. They're even confessing their sins, to us. If they can do that, maybe we can do the same thing. And then you find this transparency starts working its way into discipleship relationships and into community groups. But it really does start by doing that on a Sunday morning.
You have to lead that way.
Yeah, you have to lead that way.
It's a top-down thing, which is why when we're talking about addiction recovery ministry, any of those things, we want all of that stuff to start from the top. Like it has to be bought in from leadership, because if leaders aren't going to lead, not saying that leaders are all going to have to be the boots on the ground in a particular thing. Because I know you've kind of empowered a group of people in your church now to kind of start this recovery meeting preparation, these sorts of things. It doesn't have to be all the elders are all actively involved in every ministry, or you would pass away.
Right.
Because there's just too many things that you would get called into. But it still takes that encouragement, that top-down leadership that kind of frees the church to feel like we should be pursuing this, because the elders, are encouraging us to kind of pursue these different things. And that, I think, is so important. I think, a lot of times there will be a few people in a church that get excited about a thing. But if the leadership isn't saying, yes, pursue that, chase after that, see where that takes you, it may not last as long as when the elders are bought in and encouraging.
Yeah, and even like thinking about addiction, like I say the same thing like over and over. I repackage it with my words like on a Sunday morning. But reminding people that when we're born into this world, there really is like a hole that there's a void that's there that can only be filled with the gospel. So this term that we talked about a little while ago, just gospel-centeredness, this is where it starts like taking shape. Because I never really understood that. The gospel is, Jesus died on the cross for our sins so we can be forgiven, we can go to heaven. Gospel-centeredness is so much more than that. It's being adopted into his family. It's having a purpose for living. It's being deeply loved, even though you're flawed and broken, that you're still accepted. And when we're going and looking for other things to fill us, to satisfy us, to give us peace, joy, love, acceptance, identity, and what have you, other than Jesus, we're always going to be disappointed, but we'll try anything. So like on a Sunday morning, I'll be like, hey, don't be so quick to pick up a stone and throw at these people, because you may not understand, for example, homosexuality. But you know what they're looking for? They're looking for love. They're looking for identity. They're looking for purpose. They're looking for someone to care for them. We know that can only be found in Jesus, right? And we know that they're making some wrong choices, but come on, people. You do the same thing and I do the same thing. We go looking for other things to satisfy us other than resting in the gospel. And when you can hear that, you're like, oh, that's actually a good point. Maybe I shouldn't be so hard on them. Maybe I should get to know them a little bit better.
Right.
That's just one example.
Right.
But that could be someone that's doing the same thing with drugs.
Yeah.
You know,
Absolutely.
why are they going to opioids? Why are they going to these things? Because they're looking for something. It could be community, it could be fellowship, it could be identity, it could be just relief. But truthfully, all those things can be found in Christ.
Yeah, and that's two of those words that you used in there, community, connection, these sorts of things are things that we were created to desire. Like you need these things because He is those things.
Yes.
He is community. He is, connection. And so we naturally need those things. And I love that you said they're perhaps going after some particular drug because they're looking for connection. And that's exactly, just to get nerdy sciencey for a second, I'm not the psychologist, but I'm going to go there because it's interesting to me. All of those things that people go after quiet the parts of our brain that are looking for connection. So that there are that pill, whatever it is, that is becoming my community.
Yeah.
So I'm finding that connection, which is why we think the church is so important, because the church ought to understand this idea of not only connection to God, but connection to one another in a way that uniquely sets us up to love people be in a relationship with people, and like as a whole, welcome them into kind of this circle that we're in.
Yeah. Think about it could be anything. It could be a Thanksgiving, a dinner. It could be a birthday party. It could be anything. But think about these moments that you've experienced where everything in the world just seemed to be right. The people that I love, we were all around a table. We were sitting around a fire. There was laughter. There were jokes. There was maybe music and what have you. And you get to the end of the night and you're like, I don't even want to go home. This is right. This is good. And there's a high that comes from that is greater than anything that a drug, or anything else or anyone else could possibly give you. And you've experienced that. You've tasted that.
We want that thing.
We
and
desire that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we can have that with unbelievers, but we can also get to the point where we realize, we can have fellowship with the Father at any point in time, as well. So it's a progress.
Right.
It's a process that doesn't happen like immediately, but it does begin when you see this is what community can feel like.
Right.
And I can be a part of that.
They'll know Him by the way that we love one another.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's stated so simply, and yet sometimes we lose sight of, if we just really love each other really well, that might be a really effective way of, that's gospel centered, and that gospel centeredness is gonna translate into other things. I know one of the other things so y'all are obviously still passionate about church planting.
Yeah, we just planted one.
You just planted one. So tell me a little bit about planting Appalachian churches.
Yeah, so PAC is what we call it. PAC, Planting Appalachian Churches. That's a new organization that we formed a couple of years ago. Kind of the premise behind it is that if you talk to church planters, people that have been pastor sent, they will by and large tell you that they were not properly equipped and they did not know fully what they were stepping into. And then there was a lot of financial responsibility where they had to go out and raise money and what have you. So we took a step back and said, okay, why don't we do this? Why don't we, again, this is me saying, I don't know what I'm doing, but here's an idea.
Right.
So I don't know what I'm doing, but here's an idea. Why don't we form an organization where we can take someone that it looks like that the Lord may be calling them to plant. We can vet them to make sure that they're biblically qualified. We can make sure that there's a team of people going with them and that there's a specific geographical location that they're going to be planting. So those three things have to be there. And then when we say, okay, we have a location, we have a team, and we have a leader, then what would it look like if we spent 2 years investing in that individual and even in that group to help prepare them so that when they actually get to the point of planting, that they will be equipped, they'll be connected to lots of other pastors, they'll have a library of books and an arsenal. And the other thing is that they would understand that for the first 2 years, PAC will raise enough monies that they do not have to go out and raise any money. Whatever does not come in from just tithes and offerings on a regular basis, we will cover that so they can focus on doing ministry. So the idea was like, what would that look like?
Take away some of the fear, take away some of the
Absolutely.
the things that you worry about that maybe prevent you from actually doing ministry, so that you can actually get better at and start doing things.
Yeah, and I'll tell you like a couple of things that happened. And this is, again, we're figuring it out as we go, which I'm sure Uplift Appalachia is doing a lot of the same thing.
Constantly.
Yeah. So
always learning.
5 years from now, it's going to look a whole lot better.
Correct.
And it's going to be more systematic, and we know what step 1, step 2, step 3 are. But right now, we didn't know that. So I was like, okay, so here's a young guy. He's in his 20s. I think that the Lord has his hand on him, but he surely needs more than Jerry Williams to help equip him, even though I'm his elder and I'll spend more time with him than anyone else. So I looked around the region and said, who are the gospel-centered pastors that I know? And some of their churches are different than Redstone, but they're doing really, really good work. And what specific kind of thing is this particular pastor really, really good at? Sometimes it was time management. Sometimes it was just dealing with marriages. Sometimes it was, doing sermon preparation or what have you. So over a 2-year period of time, I would connect this church planting pastor with these guys, and I would be there with them. And we would spend a couple of hours, and I would be like, here's your subject. So bring your books, your articles, your sermons, whatever you can, and you pour into him. And then they would connect relationally so that at the end of a 2-year period, he had like 13 or 14 pastors kind of in his back pocket that anytime he needed something, he knew who to go for what. That sounds like a small thing,
right?
But it was beautiful.
Yeah.
Because not only did it help him, but all these other pastors began to realize, oh, we're a part of something bigger than just our specific congregations. And every Sunday, we're still texting each other and letting us know that we're praying for one another.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
And we were talking about this before, but that was one of our biggest, I won't say failures, but it was just one of those things that we had not learned well when we originally planted, because we planted so quickly that we didn't have, we were wanting that 2 years, like that that's almost the exact model. What you're talking about is what we were hoping to do before we planted, and we didn't really get that opportunity. It was just, God said, through a few other voices, but God said, no, just go, we'll take care of it. And so there was a lot more learning on the fly. And I think there was obviously some blessing that came from that. There were some things that we immediately got into and were able to, do, but it kind of left us kind of behind the 8 ball a little bit as far as having community as elders as well.
Right.
And that was, we didn't realize how hard that was on us until, 3-4 years into it. It's like, we really need more people in our lives, or we're dying here without, because the same thing we would tell the church. We got to love each other really well, but being in leadership needs community as well. And as much as we want to foster that relationship with people in the church, and we should, and we can, you still need some of those minds and those hearts that you can kind of reach out to, that can kind of give you that outside perspective as well. Because, if not, you're gonna run on empty for a long time, and it's hard to maintain that kind of an effort. So it goes back to everything that we always say: community is everything. Being connected to people is everything, and having people that are there that can kind of bear some of that burden alongside you and that sort of thing is a huge thing. And I'm sure, just kind of transitioning a little bit, that having that connection, that group of pastors that you were already working with and already talking to, was super key, because y'all were getting ready to plant in Hampton.
Right.
And right before or right after you planted was Hurricane Helene?
Right before.
So like you were weeks out, right?
Yeah, we were planning on launching first or second week of January.
And it came in September.
In September.
And so
in Hampton.
Like
other places as well.
Lots of other places, but
Hampton,
it's like miraculous that parts of Hampton are even still there.
Yeah.
And so I know you all, because you were already learning the people in that area. You already were building relationships and preparing. You guys were kind of in a unique place to kind of step in and respond to the hurricane, right?
Yeah. Let me give you just a little story, backstory of what happened there, because it really was amazing. And again, it's one of those where I don't know what I'm doing, but we ought to go see what's happening. So Adam Stein is the church planting pastor. So he's at Hampton Community Church now. So he and I got in his truck. We went to Rome Mountain, looked around. We drove through Elizabethton, but we ended up on this little street in Hampton called Spring Street. And we just found ourselves driving around debris and getting out of the truck and just walking up and talking to people. And it started as, knocking on the door, or just coming up, onto the porch for people that just looked like they were completely broken and lost, and they didn't know what to do next. Their whole lives were just shattered. And we would just start connecting with them. And then it's kind of like when Jesus sends out the 72, look for a person of peace. So if we saw someone that wasn't just slamming the door on our face, that were open to having a conversation, then we would say, hey, what do you need? You need mud out of your crawl space? Do you need like your sheetrock taken down? How about if we brought a team out here and could help? Would you be open to that? Those kinds of conversations began to take place with multiple people on that street. And some of them were really, really hard. Like, listen, you got to trust me because I will bring it. I promise you. You told me you're the need. I guarantee you I'll have an army here Saturday and we'll get all that mud out if you'll trust me. Give me your phone number and let's move forward. And it began that Saturday. We got just teams from I reached out to all my pastor friends. We had teams coming from all over the Tri-Cities, and it was an army. And we looked like we knew what we were doing, and we did not.
Right.
But we were just taking it one house at a time and getting to know people and loving on them, and that turned into like an everyday kind of a thing. And then every Saturday was the big day because that's when more people could come. And then we realized, I'm running a church or trying to lead a church, and you've got a full-time job and what have you. We need a coordinator. So we ended up getting 5 churches to go in together and to pay for this salary from a lady that just happened to be on Spring Street helping out. And she happened to be certified with Samaritan's Purse with disaster relief. So we hired her to be a coordinator. And as we were doing so, we had this idea. The idea was, okay, we're touching all these different homes. How about if we came up with a plan where churches could adopt a specific home and a family? And that turned into an initiative. And before you knew it, we had all of the homes on Spring Street adopted by various churches. Not all of them were even from the Tri-Cities.
Right.
We had churches in Kentucky that came in and adopted homes. And because of that, they were able to, pray for them and love on them and care for them, but also raise funds and send workers, to help the rebuild. And we're doing a big thing this Saturday. And it's the final thing on Spring Street where we're planting flowers and shrubs and putting seed and straw down so that it'll look like a neighborhood again. But all of those homes will have been completely rebuilt by the end of this summer.
Right.
Incredible.
Yeah, I know my church is involved with at least one of those houses.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe a couple.
Yeah, they're doing really, really good work.
And so it's been, I've been kind of hearing a lot of these updates as it's been going down. And I would imagine along the way, like you said, you have been getting to build relationships with these people.
But that changed it.
Right. And I'm sure that I don't want to, again, I'll probably be painting with too broad a brush, but I would imagine that most of these people are not perfect that we're helping, right?
No, they're broken.
And these people they had problems and issues even before the hurricane. The hurricane's just the thing that's right in front of their face right now.
Yeah.
And so you've now been there consistently, building trust and following through on things that you've been able to say for a long period of time, that now you're going to be able to not only rebuild a house, but also build a relationship that can last beyond just rebuilding a house. Because there's still going to be other things they're going to be dealing with the trauma of having watched their house get decimated.
They have PTSD.
That's real. But at the same time, whatever it was they were dealing with before is still going to be real in their life. I mean, not to just make everything about addiction, but that's one of the things that we're obviously focused. I guarantee you there are folks on Spring Street that are struggling with addiction. And there are people that are struggling with, bad marriages and trouble with their kids acting all of the same things that everybody else might. It's yes, this is one thing. And this one tangible thing gave us the opportunity to get to know these people. So what do you envision it looks like? So this is the big finish. We've rebuilt the houses.
Yeah.
Now what?
Well, I think that just we're back to where we talked about earlier, just knowing people, getting to know people. So the thing is, I told my wife this not long ago. I was I used to hate Hampton because from my perspective, I went to Happy Valley and we only went to Hampton when we were playing football or basketball. And who likes Hampton if you're a Happy Valley guy? Nobody.
Right.
But now that I've been in the community, I've just fallen in love with these people. And you're right, they're broken. They're absolutely broken. But not only have we helped them with disaster relief, but sometimes you just go by the house and you sit out on the front porch while they smoke a cigarette and you hang out for an hour and a half. You tell stories, you listen to their life, and you end up finding that you have begun to really love these people and they have a place in your heart. So what we're seeing is that there's relationships that have already been established there, and I think that the Lord's going to use that. Let me give you one example. Here, this is a good little story. So when we showed up that day on Spring Street, there was one particular guy. He was sitting on the front porch, and he looked like he was just mad at the world. And the sign said, "Beware of dog," and he had a big German Shepherd sitting there. And my buddy Adam's like, I got to go talk to that guy. And I'm like, be careful, because this one looks like it may be, a little dangerous. So he starts trying to talk, and eventually the guy opens up a little bit, and the German Shepherd ends up being Casey, the sweetest dog ever. Love her, but we didn't know that at the time. Scary looking. And if he wants her to, she will snarl and look like she's coming at you, but it's an act. She's sweet. So anyway, we get to know this guy. We come in that Saturday, do a lot of work for him, continue to do a bunch of stuff. And then one random day, after a couple of weeks, because we would look at people and we would say, hey, listen, we're not here just for a few weeks, because here's what's going to happen. Flood of volunteers are going to come in. People are going to want to help out. But at some point in time, they're all going to leave. And we get that. And you get that. We're not going anywhere. We promise you we're going to stay with you all year long until your house is rebuilt. And you would say that, and people would have like tears in their eyes, It's like, this is what Jesus does. He says, I'll never leave you nor forsake you, and we're not going to leave you either. So we're making that promise to you. So that was a big thing, because we kept on showing up. So this guy, Jeff, the guy that looked like he was just, upset, one day he pulls us aside and he tells us this story about when he was growing up, his dad was abusive. He said, he beat me. He beat all of us. And he said, but he had this sense of right and wrong, because he would make us go to church. So I didn't want to go to church, so he would beat me and make me go to church. And I said, once I become 18 years old, I will never go to church again. He's in his 60s now. And he said, and I've kept that promise. I have not been in church. And then he told us the night of the flood, he was on his bed with his dog, that evening, because the waters kept on, increasing and getting higher, that he said, if I survive this, oh God, please, he just prayed this prayer, I'll live differently, or I'll do something, or whatever. He didn't even know what he was praying.
He was bargaining in some way.
He was. And the water came up near the top of the bed. It was just he and his dog, and then eventually it receded, and he said, so now you guys show up. And he said, I don't like the church. In fact, I've hated the church. And he was like, but is this what the church is really like? And he said, if this is the church, I have missed out, haven't I? And he has tears that start coming out of his eyes. And we're like, Jeff, buddy, we love you. Jesus loves you. We're not going anywhere. Fast forward, house has been rebuilt. He's actually attending Hampton Community Church now.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's beautiful. But that starts with a relationship.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And that was kind of going to be one of my last questions for you, was going to be, so obviously hurricane comes through.
Yeah.
Big need. Right. Immediately, let's respond. Church has done such an amazing job. I mean, like you said, not just in our area, but all around the region, like churches from outside of the Tri-Cities coming in, stepping in, and serving. How do you think we as the church can kind of maintain what we've learned about, if we just go and we just go commit to people and we go love people and we serve, how can we kind of maintain the, because I'm sure there are some people that maybe hadn't stepped out into this active a form of ministry or this kind of relationship building, but they saw this need and they're like, no, this is where I'm going to go. What are some of the things that maybe you've seen or things that we can learn from our response as the church to the hurricane to continue loving and serving people as we go forward? How can we maintain some of this momentum?
Well, we have to. I will say this. I think it's a challenge. I don't think it's easy, and I don't think it's going to be easy. So when I think about from a discipleship standpoint, Jesus had a lot of disciples, or people that were following him. He had 72, but then he had 12, but then he had 3. And with those 3, he just took them with him. So what I've learned kind of early on is, like, if I've got my 3 guys, I just take them with me places. So as an example, like the guy, one of the guys that goes to your church, I kept on telling him, like, man, don't talk with me on the phone about this. You need to meet me because you need to see what's happening. So eventually he came and we walked the street. He got to know people, and then he began to understand, like, oh, the Lord really is here. This is a beautiful thing. So I really and truly think you got to keep going. You got to be intentional. You got to make sure that in your schedule with all that you're doing, that your focus is not just on the church and the Sunday morning and, all of the details of that, but you have to be connecting with people. And as you do, when you're rubbing shoulders with unbelievers or people that are hurting or people that have been impacted by the hurricane, that you're taking someone or a couple of people with you. And I think it's slowly, methodically, that'll get into their hearts and then that'll begin to spread. But I don't think you can like just preach it on a Sunday morning and hey, it's not going to happen. And I was really, really frustrated with that early on because people would hear it, they would be inspired, but then no one would step in.
Right.
It was only when I would say, hey, will you go with me? Let's have coffee and then I want to take you over to Spring Street, or I want you to go with me to this thing that I do on Wednesday afternoons, and then we'll talk about it afterward. Mm-hmm. When that happens, then they see it.
Yeah.
And then once you taste it, you want to be a part
And that
of
kind of
it.
goes back to what we were saying earlier where, so much of our ministry is just kind of that work in progress. Like we start doing it and we're learning as we're going. And that's been so much of what we've been doing, at Uplift. Is 'cause at first we thought, kind of like you were just saying, we're going to go preach it. We're going to go say, hey guys, there's this great need and we have some great ways that we can help. And the church will be like, please tell us more. And then we're going to say, here's what you can do. And then they're all going to go do it. And it's going to be amazing. We're going to solve addiction that way. And, I'm sure it was naive to think that we're just going to, we have this perfect message and and the truth behind the message is definitely still there, but our methods have drastically changed. Now there's this great need. And I'm going to go give these 3 guys a ride from their recovery house to their job training on Tuesday. Will you come ride with me?
Yeah.
And then they come ride with me and they're like, I could do this. It's like, okay, they need to get that same ride tomorrow. You want to do it? And they're like, yeah, I can do that.
Yeah.
And then they give them a ride. And then a couple weeks later, we all get together and we have a lunch and we're like, what has this been like for you? And like, some of these guys are great.
Yeah.
This is awesome. I'm liking this. In fact, I can think of 2 other people in my small group at church that ought to be doing this along with me. And I'm like, grab them and do what I did with you. Take them with you, and it turns out instead of just casting this big vision and everybody saying, what you've said so eloquently has convinced me that now we should do these things, looks a whole lot more like discipleship.
It does. Yeah. No, I agree.
And I think sometimes we get so focused on kind of the big churchy part of it. Not that we don't need that. We still need somebody to, break down, exposit scripture. The preaching of the word is still vital to the life of the church.
Right.
But in the end, it's still going to be saying, hey, come walk with me. And that's...
Yeah. No, I agree. So two quick thoughts. One, if I was ever going to write a book, it would be titled, I really don't know what I'm doing, but here's an idea. So I think that here's an idea is something that you guys are doing with Uplift Appalachia as well. It may not be the best thing, but it's something.
It's something. Let's try.
So that's the thing I'm a big fan of as a leader. Like even with the guy that just planted the church, I'm like, here's the thing. Don't be stifled trying to like make it perfect. But if you've got an idea, if you see something that might be able to be done, go do it.
Yeah.
Step out in faith and do it. The Lord will refine it, but he'll use that step of faith.
It's really easy to feel like we have to have it perfected. We have to cross every T, dot every I before we, like, what are all the implications of if we do this? What could go wrong? What are we going to have to respond to? We have to be prepared for every version of every possible. It's like, we're never going to know what exactly is going to happen.
But if you say, here's an idea, why don't we drive them to wherever? Why don't we take them to court, or why don't we take them to the grocery store, or take them to the bank, or what have you? That's an idea. And will the Lord use that? Absolutely, because you're connected with them. So I do think that there's something to like that. The other part, and this is just a pet peeve of mine, I think that the church needs to quit focusing on their name and their brand and their Sunday morning experience. That drives me crazy because it's not about, whatever. I'm not going to put a name of a church in there because there's probably one of those around here. They would think that I'm picking on them. Yeah. But it's not Redstone Church Elizabethton. I'm like, do not go out and endorse Redstone Elizabethton. Endorse Jesus. Endorse the gospel. They can go to any other church that they want to go as long as it's a gospel-centered church that they want to hear the word of God. But don't make the focus on this polished Sunday morning experience because we're just a bunch of broken people that are coming in, hearing the word of God, and being reminded of what the gospel is, right? And then what do we do afterwards? We go out on mission. Do
something with it.
Right, we do something, and that something has to be connecting with people. And guess what? All of these people, especially in Appalachia, are broken. And a lot of the brokenness leads to addictions as well.
I love that point about worrying about the brand because it's like that fear of, again, it's like all the Pharisees saying to Jesus, why are you hanging out with those guys? Do you know what that's going to look like?
Yeah.
You're hanging out with the worst of the worst. And he's like, yep.
Yeah, Andy and Dell are like, If we move forward with this, at some point in time, you're going to have some people that are going to be coming in to Redstone that's not going to be like looking like everybody else. And I'm like, good. That's the way it needs to be.
Let's do that.
Yes, it's the best.
And sometimes they might not know how not to be disruptive, or so, like they're, one of my favorite guys from when we were here downtown, loved worship music. And by the time he'd come in, he would front row, singing loud, praying out loud, right in the middle of, we'd be in the quiet song and he'd start going back to the loud song. It was like, and at first you're like, maybe we need to have a conversation. It's like, no.
Right.
Like, he doesn't know what's normal, what's not, but like, he's here. Like, let's.
And he's welcomed here.
He's welcomed. It's like, now I'm not going to let him start preaching in tongues or something like we'll be careful about some things now. Sure. But it's like, we had to acclimate to this idea of what we expect or what seems normal to us or what seems safe to us isn't what we're always going to get. And that might look funny to somebody that may be visiting our, like somebody's like, I want to come visit your church. Great. And now you've got this guy standing up, dancing around, singing that does not look like the rest of the churches that they visited. And it's really tempting to be like, what are they going to think of our church? But it's not about our church. You're right. It's about that guy. And I know him and I know his story and I know what he's been like and I know what he's gone through.
Yeah.
And that's
amen.
So that's really encouraging. Well, last question for you. So I asked at the beginning, what were some of the lessons that you had learned that maybe would have shaped your ministry going from administration into being a pastor?
Right.
What is a lesson that you think you've learned in the last 5.5 years that you're really hoping to apply to the next 5.5 years of your ministry?
Yeah, so I'm looking at a lot of the good things that have taken place. Like, we planted a church and the Lord sent people to us, so our attendance never went down. So I think being obedient to the gospel is there. Discipleship is there. Those things, are there. Rubbing shoulders with unbelievers. I think those things are a part of our DNA, and I don't think they're going to change. But here's what I'm seeing. A couple of things. One, even within like the church itself, like the Sunday morning people that are coming on a regular basis, there are marriages that are not gospel-centered marriages that are struggling. And I've been thinking about that and praying about that a lot. There's a lot of guys, there's probably girls as well, statistics say that there are, but there's a lot of guys that they may not be running to drugs, but man, they're running toward pornography. So I'm seeing that need. And then I'm looking at people that believe the gospel, that believe that Jesus is Lord. They know that it's about a relationship, but they really don't dive into the Word of God on a regular basis, and they don't communicate prayerfully and honestly to the Lord on a regular basis. So I really do see I didn't see this coming, but over these next couple of years, I really want to focus on marriages and homes and just seeing guys that are just, squashing this demon of pornography and storming the gates of hell. I'm just over it. I'm tired of it. I'm sick of it, and I want to do something with that. So I really see that the Lord is kind of like, stirring something in my heart to be able to address those things. But at the same time, while also, dealing with addictions and other things.
What I was going to say is I think that seems very timely because our whole society has been all about, we got to get away from the community part and focus on the individual.
Right.
It's all about, what do you want? What can I get out of this? What can I do? And it's your identity. It's what do you want to be? And I think that we're starting to see a little bit of a cultural shift back toward this idea of, wow, maybe having families and kids is a good thing.
Right.
And that's going to actually benefit our society in the long. And so I think you're like, it sounds like you're right there at the right time. And I'm sure that's because that's where God is taking you, and that's where God is taking us.
He's made it pretty clear.
But that's. I mean, I use this quote all the time that I stole it from a guy who did a TED Talk years ago now, Johann Hari, who says the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's human connection. And it's like family, church, community, connection, people, all of these other things that you're saying people are chasing after are just trying to make the most of the individual, but it's all about that bringing people back together part and really diving into people. Well, this has been great. I really appreciate you hanging out and telling us a little bit about your ministry. And I'm really excited to see what all you have done. And I'm sure by the next time we do a follow-up on this in a couple of years, you'll have 18 more churches planted all throughout Appalachia.
Don't think so, but we'll see.
You'll at least be organized and have a whole process figured out by then, obviously, right? Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
This has been a podcast powered by Uplift Appalachia. To learn more, You can find us at upliftappalachia.org.